Hello, and welcome to the 2017 edition of the Group XP Experience Index. I'm here today with Iain Ellwood. My name is Tim Greenhalgh. I'm the Chief Creative Officer, and Iain is our Chief Growth Officer. For the next 20 minutes to 25 minutes, Iain and I are going to take you through, obviously, the findings of this year's Group XP Index charts and the results from that. But also we wanted to spend some time, I think, just talking to you about how we're seeing experience and how it's changing. We're starting to see, and you will see maybe some surprising entrants and surprising movements within the Group XP Index. And I think that reflects the fact that experiences come from many and different sources. And I think it's important for us to understand. So what we'll do is share with you the index. We also want to share with you some thoughts we've been having about where experiences are going and how you might start to codify that and almost create some themes around it. And then we will also take you through some thoughts we've had about what we're calling a tech and human paradox. So that's the next 20 to 25 minutes. If during that time you want to get in touch, then please contact us on info@group-xp.com. A very personal email address, I think you'll agree. I can promise you there aren't chatbots at the other end. There are real people there who will be gathering your questions. But obviously after this, and in the meantime, if you have any questions, please contact us. And also you can download this report, which has many case studies in it, as well as a full explanation of what we're talking about today at www.group-xp.com. So 20 to 25 minutes, we're going to now talk to you about experiences and the Experience Index.
Fantastic, thank you, Tim. And just before we dive into and reveal the results for 2017, I just want to give you a bit of background. And really, we started out on this journey really trying to quantify the value of experience. So putting a dollar value on why experiences help consumers, but also drive businesses and growth. And there are two aspects to that. One is, first of all, driving short-term sales. And the second is obviously the much more important long-term shareholder value. So that's why we've built the index. I'm just going to take you through it now. So of course, first of all, we work with our partners at Brands E. They have got a fantastic consumer database. They survey over 3 million consumers around the world every year in over 51 markets. So we've got a robust, rigorous database to work with. And that's what we use as our fundamental data points to build the index. There are 3 levels of analysis we do for the index. And the first one, like last year, is building on 4 key components of the index. And that's create, deliver, engage, and strive. And those are really the kind of the foundational building blocks that we interrogate the data, the Brands E data with, to identify which are the strongest experience brands. Each of those has a unique tag to it. So create something unique, deliver on people's most important needs, engage through integrated services and content, and striving to make people's future lives better. So they really get to the heart of why people enjoy experiences, but also why they choose brands over another one. And so we score each of those 4 components individually to get a profile for each of the brands, in this case Microsoft, and then we create an average, so a total score for Microsoft, 114.17, and that's a straight average across all 4 scores. So add the 4 scores up and then divide by 4. And the reason we do it that way is so that we can compare Microsoft in the tech media sector with an FMCG CPG brand, with a market in China or America. So every brand is benchmarked against a market average of 100. So if you've got a score of 114, that's already extremely high compared with the average of 100. So now you understand how we built the index. Let's reveal the top 30, and in reverse order, let's start with the bottom half of the top 30. And already we can see 6 new entrants for 2017, and they cover a range of media brands, so like YouTube coming in at number 16, as well as brands that are reinventing themselves like Microsoft at number 21. Now if we look at the top 15, we can see there's even less movement than perhaps the bottom half of the score. And we can really start to see the top brand again, for the second year running, is Pampers, but we can already see other brands coming up like Facebook and Google, who are growing better than other brands. And I think we really start to understand what's the shape of great experiences and how they're driving value. If we look at the scores for those brands, we can see a different picture emerging. Actually, Pampers has lost value since 2017, and all the other brands in the top 10 have grown significantly in value, so they're catching up. So I'm very curious to see how 2018 scores will look, but we can start to see that a lot of other brands are really gaining on those top brands in the marketplace. But again, as I say, 100 is the average, so you can see in the top global 30 brands, already we've got an extremely high score for all of those. If we break those scores down by sectors, we can see that CPG, or FMCG, is the largest sector, 23% of the brands are in that. But the next bunch are the most interesting, so the disruptive categories, so mobility, tech, and media entertainment account for over a third of the brands in the top 30, and that's extraordinary and gives us a good insight on how to build extraordinary experience brands. What's also interesting is hospitality, where you might expect them to be good at experiences, is low. And again, still there are no hotel brands, classic hotel brands, in the top 30. And we can understand why that is, because they've failed so far to really connect the human and the tech. They're very good at the human personal service on property, but they failed to build the genuine tech and data interaction that we see from many of these other successful brands. If we take a snapshot of some markets around the world, we can look at the US market, and again, Amazon is number one as it was last year. We can also see the US is dominated by service brands, and Fidelity has performed very strongly this year compared with last year. But again, lots of great service brands that you recognize in the US. When we look at the UK, interestingly, the top three in the UK has not changed. So Pampers, Amazon and PayPal are still strong. But we can also see new entrants like Dyson, the fantastic premium vacuum cleaner global brand, now just announced they're entering the driverless car market. So true innovators really pushing up the league table as well. And then finally, the China market, again, dominated by Chinese brands, not surprisingly, WeChat and Baidu right up there. WeChat number one this year, and there are only a few global Western brands in the Chinese market. So again, we can start to see how these very China-specific brands are really shaping that marketplace and great experiences. Of course, let's come to the money now. What we've really proved is that great experiences make more money, and they do it in three different ways. First of all, we see that what we call high experience brands, those at the top of our list, drive consumer demand by more than 26% compared with those with low experiences. Equally, those with high experiences have a higher brand valuation growth over the past 10 years by over 166% compared with the average. And finally, perhaps most important for CEOs and boards, they've driven shareholder value by more than 200% compared with the market average. So let's take a look at that now. Here is the market average over the past 3 years for two classic indices, the S&P 500 and the MSCI World Index, and they've performed reasonably well over the past 3 years. But when we take our portfolio of top 30 global experience brands, they've more than doubled the performance of those indices. So if you invested in those stocks 3 years ago, you would have gained more than double the performance than the average. And if we compare that to last year's, the 73.3%, that's where our portfolio of top 30 brands performed. So even compared with last year's portfolio, we can see that there is increasing value growth for investing in great experience brands.
So that was a good and quick run through the index and how the various brands have performed. We'll show you that again towards the end of this session. I mean, the Group XP Index has now been working on it for 3 years. This is obviously the second of the actual release of the actual data and the charts. But in that 3 years, we've been trying to understand in more detail kind of the role experience plays in a business's life, but also in a consumer's life. And so we thought it was important, as we've been out auditing and looking at and smelling and touching and feeling and spending time with the brands that are doing well on the index, trying to get a real sense of what it is that they're doing across those 4 areas that Iain was talking about. And I think as we've looked at that, it started to become clear to us that there are some themes emerging, themes that are delivered by the behaviour that they're performing, but also themes that are being born out of the data that we're finding as we look through the index and all the amount of data that we can look through on something like Brand Z. So what I'd like to now do is just take you through some of those themes, some of those archetypes as we're calling, that we've started to see emerging. And I think these will start to give you a sense of the way in which, whether you're working with a client or you're a client yourself, you can start to compare and contrast yourself with other brands around the world, but also work out what your key strengths are as a brand. What's becoming clear is that all the brands we talked about are performing very well across the creating and the engaging, the delivering and the striving. But one of the things that we're finding is they're playing to their key strengths. So what you'll see on the screen now is the 6 areas that we've identified as being the archetypes for experience. And these are campfire, a highway experience, a playground experience, a lighthouse experience, a gym experience and a lab experience. And when you look at how these chart in terms of the brands that best exemplify this type of behaviour, you can start to see that there really are only 6 ways this can be broken up. Because if you look at a campfire brand, it is majoring, it's strong, but it's majoring when it engages and strives. A highway brand is majoring when it is creating and delivering something unique and delivering to people's needs, etc., etc. You can see how those start to fall out. What we've done for you today is just to unpack those a little bit more. So when you think about campfire, the best example of that we can see at the moment on our index is a brand like Facebook, number 2, with an average score of 139. But one of the things about Facebook is it indexes quite high in terms of engaging with really strong content and very well distributed content, but also you can see that they're striving for a better world for everybody. I think the thing we're finding with campfire brands and in the campfire experiences is that the thing that typifies them is this is a place where people can connect. So when you look at Facebook and the brands that it owns, more importantly, you start to get a sense of a space and a campfire experience that is about being engaging and very sociable. It's worldly, it's liberal, it's very optimistic. And the one thing it does as a campfire experience is it encourages collaboration. So I'll leave that thought with you for now as I take you through the next 5. The next one being a highway brand. We see that as Coca-Cola, this idea of consistent, convenient and a seamless experience. They're number 20 on the index with an average score of 114.92. Highway brands are the ones that really offer you more than you'd expect. They're easy, clean and simple. They enable and support people's lives. That's how they've set themselves up. And so what they do is that they create really strong experiences that you may not expect. Of course, they're a product on the shelf, but we know that Coca-Cola and brands similar who offer this kind of consistent convenience are looking at other ways in which they can engage with consumers. The next one is playground. The idea of being stimulating, an enjoyable sense of discovery. Is that a brand that sounds like the brand you work for? This is all about delivering on people's most important needs and engaging them with great digital content that's fully united. So when you start to look at Adidas, one of the things that we're finding is that they are really intuitive and human. They are reading culture in ways that other brands aren't and understanding what plays into the culture. They're coming up with things like localized pop-ups. They're very vivid and entertaining and informative in the way that they behave. My Adidas is all about co-creation. It's all about a live dialogue with consumers. So they've moved from simply just being a purveyor of sports goods to a brand that is now, through its experiences and the way it interacts with consumers, is creating this enjoyable sense of discovery. If we move on to lighthouse brands, we would see Tesla, this idea of being an expert guiding light, number 26 with 113 average score. They focus on having a very unique offer and obviously clearly striving to make people's lives better. They are clearly showing a better way. Tesla, and we shouldn't underestimate the other brands that Elon Musk is involved with, are really like Hyperloop that's on the screen now, as well as the Boring Company that's creating tunnels to get us faster around the world. But he is committed to a sustainable future. He is committed to helping and educating people understand what electric vehicles and sustainability can do for our world. So he's supporting and educating people through the experiences you get when you go and buy a Tesla car. He's trying to show us a better way. And as we say, lighthouse brands tend to have a very unique vantage point from which they present their offer and their opinion. I should say, as we're talking, that when you look at the report that we've produced, which we'll talk about and we'll give you the details of again later, we've done actually a deep dive into Adidas, Colgate and Tesla. So you can see the audits that we've done of those brands. A gym brand is Colgate. Colgate is all about, as a gym would be, all about constant improvement. Colgate is a fascinating brand. You know, we assume it is just a box that sits on the shelf in the supermarket. When you look at what Colgate is doing, what's on the screen now, this idea of bright smiles, bright futures, well, this is something where they are giving away free dental screening across the world. They're actually helping people educate themselves about oral care, which is a very important factor for the world today. This has actually struck 800 million people in 80 countries. They're all about connecting the dots between what their product is, but also what their product offers, this idea of continuous improvement. It's all about the attentions to details. They are brutal in the use of their colour and their identity, so that you can never fail to spot Colgate when you're in a store. But they also have decided to think about how they integrate what they believe in with what the world cares about. So this idea of striving for a better future, another factor of a gym brand, which is the fact that they are now started employing and sponsoring water ambassadors, because they're as concerned about the amount of water that you waste while you leave your tap on when you're brushing your teeth as they are about making sure that your teeth are clean. And so this idea of hashtag every drop counts is a huge thing that Colgate are pushing through. And this is what I was saying at the beginning about how we should understand where people and where consumers, as they respond to the Brand Z audit, how they perceive experience. It isn't just what we would typically assume experiences are. And then finally, we've got lab brands. Brands that are constantly redefining new worlds and that we can take part and watch as they do that. And we see that as Google, who've done very well this year and are number 6 on the index. I think the interesting thing about Google is that they are really challenging so many conventions, but for the benefit of the types of things that we do. Again, they own a number of brands like Android, etc. But also even just recently, just the whole way in which they've actually made the Google Assistant even more intuitive and more easy to use. And now that's going to be built into so many of the things that Google do in the future. So they're challenging convention. It's very fluid and personalized, unlike our email address. And it's very much about a live experience. So, as we said, we have extensive data.
And you know, obviously this is a quick canter through 3 levels of analysis, which you can read much more about in the report. There's the foundational 4 scores, there's the overall index score, and then the archetypes that Tim's just helpfully taken us through. So that's 3 different ways we view the way this can be unpacked. So we've got the extensive data, but also we've also humanized that through the archetypes. And I guess for us, this is really the central theme for this report, and what we've understood from all our analysis through all the archetypes is this tech-human paradox. So really what we see is when CEOs are talking to their boards about how do we grow our business, it's really how do we find the balance between those 2 things? How do we automate, use AI and machine learning to make the experience seamless, but also retain that humanity and human touch and emotion that we know that consumers really love. So the question really is, can robots really provide emotion? And I guess for us, you know, of course, artificial intelligence is fantastic. It already is part of our lives, whether it's an online chat messenger or the North Face clothing brand's jacket chooser. Go and try it if you can. It already understands what the weather's going to be like where you're traveling and helps you select a jacket for it. It's fantastic. So on one hand, you know, AI and machine learning is already fantastic. And I guess the question is not Alan Turing's imitation game, do you know it's a computer on the other side of the fence that's serving you, but more, do you want to spend your time with a computer or robot or machine? Or would you prefer some human contact as well?
And one of the things that we've been studying, as I think we've been talking about today, is to understand this balance between the function and the emotion of an experience. We know that, if you think about some of the work that Daniel Kahneman has written about in terms of how consumers put emotions first, I think the idea of getting a balance between amazing data, amazing algorithms that make my life so much easier, But you contrast the algorithms with the aprons. We love people who serve us a cup of coffee, who smile to us in the morning. And that, I think, is one of the things that when you look at the top 30 index, you will see a number of brands who are perfectly balancing the use of great technology, great insight, great data, but they're also personalizing their brands with things like every single drop counts, Brighter Lives, Brighter Future, My Adidas. These are all very human traits of the experience you have when you spend time with those brands. Again, Tesla, one of the world's most automated and most dynamic companies. Still, the people when you meet when you're trying to buy a Tesla car are actually the most engaged and the most informative people you could ever wish to meet. So getting this balance is absolutely right. And I think it was interesting that Iain has written this article that's in the report about how we look when we create experiences to keep a balance between both the tech and the human, so it doesn't become a paradox. It becomes an actual advantage for brands in the future. So if I can just remind you that if you do need to send through any questions for us, I think some people have been asking questions while we've been talking in this last 20 minutes. Obviously, if you need to contact us again, let me just remind you, info@group-xp.com. But obviously, please download the report. I think you'll find it very useful. There's quite a lot of information in there, as well as I said, the reports that we've made after auditing 3 of the brands that are within the Group XP index. I think what we'll now do is, in a second, is move to some questions. But I think I should just say before that, thank you for your time today. We would love to spend more time with you. I think within the Group XP firmament, we have a number of experts now who've spent really the last 3 years trying to really peel back the layers of what makes a great experience. And doing that by both looking at data, as Iain said, but also now, I think, codifying that into a series of ways in which one can start to align your brand to an experience theme and actually start to use that in a very consistent way to understand how your brand best plays to its strengths when delivering experiences to consumers. So I think while we were off screen, we've actually received a number of questions which we'll go through now.
We have indeed, and looking down the list, there's some fascinating questions here, so thank you. Do keep them coming in. And I guess the first one's probably more for you, Tim, is Jonathan from Hong Kong is asking, how can the archetypes help me with the short-term changes to my client businesses?
Well, we've used them ourselves with a couple of clients already, and I think what happens in the short term is it becomes a very interesting way of people focusing through a brainstorm on, again, as I said before, playing on the strengths. Now, it could be that you aren't just a single archetype. It could be that the way in which you present your brands, it could be separate. You may be a playground in certain aspects of the way your brand behaves, but you may also choose to draw off other strengths that you have in your brand and actually be more of a campfire at times. But I think what it does is, if you start a conversation with the client about let's create a great experience, that's quite an open-ended question. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you say, now what would we do if we were to be more campfire in the way that we behaved? I think it's just a useful tool to start to really galvanise thinking.
Fantastic, thank you. And there's another question coming from David from London, and he asked a question which we get a lot about Pampers being number one. And I guess there are a few kind of data points around this. Obviously, Pampers is a P&G brand. P&G is one of the world's best marketing companies, and always has been. Pampers actually is their first $10 billion power brand. And of course, they made a big shift a few years ago from being a kind of paper products company to being a company that focuses on the growth of babies and mothers. And I think it's really interesting, that reframing of the question, and we talk a lot about that in the report, that getting the exam question right at the start of your strategy is so important. And I think when Pampers reframed their questioners, actually our purpose is to help babies and mothers grow. They made an enormous shift in the way they innovated their experience in order to make sure they deliver against that purpose rather than worry too much about the paper products. And it comes through, and you'll see we did a deep showcase of it last year in the report, which you can still download as well, about why and what they're doing to really help people change their lives.
And I think you'll see many of the same traits coming through in the case study we've done this year on Colgate. A very similar brand. You wouldn't necessarily, as I said at the beginning, assume that they'd be one of the top experience brands, but they are. And they are for the reasons that consumers see in them different things that we might see as creatives. they see, as I say, a striving to make the world better. The idea that they are focused on oral care, that it's not just about toothpaste and toothbrushes, it's about an entire oral care system they're trying to create in a way in which they're helping people just make the best of their lives that they can. So I think as you look through the index, you should really try and understand why certain brands are there and for what reason. They're there for a reason. That's how consumers have voted them, and that's how we've analysed the data. So it is often surprising that Pampers is number one, but actually when you think about it and you look deeper, it really isn't. Now, will it be number one next year is the question.
Well, we'll have to wait and find out on that. But it is also true, one of the ways we see the most use for this index is creating some global benchmarks. Because of course, clients know everything about the banking sector they're in or the toothpaste sector that they're in, but really looking at the best brands in the world, and that's of course a consumer view. So the way they view the world is, I use Uber, or I use Amazon, or I use Colgate or Pampers, and I judge everything else against that global benchmark. So when you look at the report, again, dig into what's the right global benchmark campfire brand or playground brand for you, because that's the way you're going to drive your business forward most effectively, rather than worrying too much about your category itself. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So one, again, maybe Tim, this is from Fran in Germany. So how can online retailers get more EQ into their experience?
Okay, so I think we should question actually whether online retailers already do have EQ in their experience. Right. I think just because they're online doesn't mean that I don't have some kind of an emotional engagement with an online brand. I think one of the things we're seeing, obviously, is that online brands are also starting to explore how they can become more physical in the way that they behave. But I think that when you look at the index, there are plenty of kind of pure play online brands that are on that index, because what they're doing is they are working those levers of creating, delivering, engaging and striving to create what is an emotional reaction that people are getting, as much as it may be frictionless, as much as it may be seamless. So I think that's the equal question goes for how can brands that are supposed to be more in queue and more physical, i.e. touching consumers daily, how can they actually make themselves even better and even more emotional in the way that they engage consumers? Fantastic, thank you. And then probably time for one more. Why are there no Asian brands in the global top 30? And that's from Nikki in Shanghai. And I guess one of the things is that, you'll see this in the report in more detail, but we really focus on the global top 30 brands. So one of the things that's really important is that they're present across the globe or in a certain number of markets. And of course, whilst WeChat and Tencent and Baidu are fantastic brands in their own market, and we recognize that China itself is a market-sized, a global market for those local brands, they yet to build their presence beyond those markets, and it's for that reason alone that they're not, because of course WeChat and Baidu would probably be in the global top 30 were they more present around the world. And that's also why we run sessions in Shanghai and Hong Kong and Singapore with much more localized data to really unpack what's happening in those very specific tailored markets as well. So thank you for your time. That was the Group XP Experience Index for 2017. If we don't see you before, we'll see you next year, but hopefully we'll see you before. Thanks for your time. Thank you.